this tip is a bit more of an advanced tip, and the reason I say that is because it involves intentionally changing the angle of the knife that you're carving at down into the wood. And as a beginner carver, or even with a little bit of experience but still kind of getting a feel for the skill, the main thing that we want to focus on, or one of the main things anyway, is keeping a consistent knife angle throughout the length of a cut and for every cut. All the different shapes and sizes of cuts that we make, you want to focus on having the consistent knife angle. It gives a better look, and also make sure that the cuts all meet up consistently as long as you're using the same angle. But for a situation like this, it can actually be beneficial to intentionally change the angle, the steepness of how deep you're cutting into the wood. And the reason I say that is, for a situation like this, you've got the grain running this direction, the cut going this way, so you've got these thin ridges here. These lines are going to be ridges as I remove the chips between, and those are going to be weak, easy to tear out. And you can see inside here, kind of this first few millimeters of the cut is really narrow, so it really doesn't take very much pressure from the knife to make that cut, and it's really easy to undercut, to put a little bit too much pressure and start to get the knife to go underneath one of those ridges that you don't want to be undercutting, because if you do that with this weak grain, it can pop out and lose chunks that you wanted to keep. So the typical way I would do this is you just put the knife here and kind of draw along and push a little bit deeper into the wood as you get wider. But the tip in this situation would be, instead of using this kind of knife angle, intentionally rotating the knife up a little bit like this, so it's not straight vertical. That's not going to do any good. You need it to go sideways a bit so that you get that kind of V shape down in the wood. But instead of a 60 degree angle somewhere in there, you might go up to 75 or something like that. I haven't measured this, but just steeper angle, not completely vertical. And so I'll start in here with that kind of steep angle, and then as I get to somewhere around here, as it flares out and I get a little bit more margin for being able to, if I undercut at this point, it's not going to be as detrimental. So I'm not as concerned with going too deep, so I can kind of roll the knife back to a standard cutting angle. And then do that cut, and same thing on this one. In this particular case, if I undercut, I'm just going to be going into this extra wood that's not really of concern, but you do want to, again, use the same angle for your cuts, just so that you get a consistent, the sides, so they meet up in the middle and you get consistent angles. So I'm going to try to use that same steeper angle here until I get to about here again, then I'll start to roll it over and then get that typical shape. And so now the second cut, as I get to this ridge, is going to be where that becomes more relevant, as I kind of find the value of that. So I'm going to again use the steeper angle, and as it comes out, roll down to the standard angle. And same thing, going steep. And flatten out a little bit. And now it'll be a little bit easier to kind of demonstrate the value of that, what's happening here. If I use my normal kind of shallower, standard cutting angle, in order to get the cuts to meet, I'm going to be kind of cutting further sideways, and the depth is going to be very minimal. But if I come up, then I have more room to cut down into the wood before I start getting too far sideways. And so it just helps with some of that fine, delicate space where, again, it's so thin, the amount of pressure it takes to undercut is very small. So this gives you a little bit margin for error to push harder, and you're going to be going more down than sideways, and so you're not undercutting and you're not weakening that ridge by as much. And by the time you get out here and you start to flatten out to the shallower angle, it's a stronger chip. You don't have to worry as much about undercutting again. And I think this is a hypothesis more than it is something I've observed, but I feel like for kind of the weaker, shallower areas, they produce less shadow. And so this might also help accentuate some of those smaller chips or smaller sections of chips to cast more of a shadow, more contrast, so they don't get as washed out. So one more chip here as an example, steep angle. Then lay the knife down for the second half. And if you're not doing a chip like this where it flares out, if you're just doing a consistently thin chip, then you don't need to do the part where the second part I'm laying it down to the normal angle. You could just keep a steeper angle if it's a really fine chip and you want to make sure you're not undercutting. You can just intentionally keep that steeper angle. But in this case, I kind of want to get back to my normal cutting angle on the wider parts of the chip. So yeah, you can kind of see you're able to preserve that. And this is an optional thing. You don't have to do that. If you're able to control the tip of the knife consistently and not undercut these ridges, then there's nothing wrong with that. That works fine too. But if you find that on these fragile areas you tend to undercut and get a little bit of those pieces ripping out, which is really easy to do, again, especially on this short across the grain kind of cut, you can try that idea of using a steeper knife angle on those fragile areas. And I definitely recommend getting, practice board, something like this, not trying it on the project for the first time. Give it a couple of attempts, see how that goes. It's a bit tricky to get a feel for changing that knife angle, and then especially like this, rotating back down in the middle of a cut, keep that smooth, following the lines and everything. But give it a shot and see if that helps.